conscious endeavor. I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by a conscious endeavor. It is something to be able to paint a particular picture or to carve a statue, and so to make a few objects beautiful. But it is far more glorious to carve and paint the very atmosphere and medium through which we look, which morally we can do. To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts. Henry David Thoreau.
Much, Diana, and we certainly do intend to affect the quality of not only all of our days, but that of everyone we touch, if we are able to elevate our hearts, our minds, our spirits to such an extent that we can be of a benevolent influence in this world, which is undergoing great trial right now. We are taking up the topic from this week's Still and Moving Center Almanac of Shiva and self-regeneration. And this is in anticipation of the celebration called Shiva Maharatri. It's a time in India where one would fast and remain in vigil all night long for the new moon of this particular month. And it's dedicated to Lord Shiva, who is both the force in the universe that represents destruction, also regeneration. And we're very fortunate to have with us today for starting off our conversation, Peeyush Kumar, who has spoken with us so beautifully in the past. He is from the Hindu tradition of Shaivism, Kashmiri Shaivism in particular. Two of the dominant concepts that he draws from it are that everything has a purpose, and that in a sense, each of us creates this entire reality in which we live. So there's a great sense of personal responsibility. And he's coming to us today while he's traveling. Internet connection is not as he might most like it to be, so we'll be really tuning in to the sound of his voice. And Peeyush, can we let you start us off?
Yeah, thank you, Renee, and thanks everyone for having me here again. Renee, thank you for that beautiful introduction of Kashmiri Shaivism. So when we talk about Mahashivratri, so basically, it's composed of three words, really. So there is Maha, and there's Shiva, and there is Ratri. So Maha means great in Sanskrit, and Shiva is, and we'll talk a lot more about Shiva. So I'll just say, one of the primal deity in the Indian philosophy, and Ratri means night. So it basically means the great night of Shiva, right? And this time it's on March 1st, which is actually one day before the new moon. And I want to speak about a little bit about the new moons. So there are actually 12 Shivratris. So, there's only one Mahashivratri. So there's only one great night of Shiva, but there are 12 nights of Shiva, and they happen every lunar cycle, one day before the new moon. And the reason for that, specifically for some of you who might be, following the moon cycles, or who might be, connecting with astrology, is that every new moon, and right before the new moon is the dark moon, and that's really what it means. So it's the dark moon that we have. So dark, D-A-R-K, dark. Specifically, this particular moon cycle that happens between February and March, the reason it's called the Great Moon from this astrological or astronomical viewpoint is that this particular new moon, again in tropical astrology, as we might know, it falls under Pisces. And there's a reason for that. That Pisces, the new moon in Pisces, is considered the great night because it is the night of absoluteness, and it's the night of complete darkness. In India, again, some of the other ways which people describe this particular night is it's the darkest night, not the longest night. The longest night is the winter solstice. This is the darkest night of the year. And that really opens up the question, right? I mean, it's actually a pretty beautiful celebration. Growing up, I remember, particularly around this particular festival, I always had a special feeling in the ways I connected with it. And I'm remembering when I was like 6 years old or 7 years old. And there was just an essence, there was just an energy in the air that was very special for this night. And, of course, this particular energy, if we can call that, is the universal energy. But there was also a cultural aspect to it. Everyone fasts, everyone takes time inwards, and they sit with that. Right. So it's also considered the great night of meditation. Now, not everyone obviously culturally meditates. So why is it, what is it that makes it so special, right? And if I was to describe it using one word, and that would be renunciation. So renunciation, to renounce something. Now, a lot of different traditions have different aspects and different understanding and ways of describing renunciation. And all of it, of course, touches on what it really means. But let me actually give you my understanding of it. And that probably would lead us into the theme of this night, of this talk. And that would be regeneration, right? So renunciation, and this actually comes from Buddhist traditions. And again, Buddhist traditions are very close to Shaivite traditions, especially the Kashmiri Shaivites, because they came from the same roots and they developed and co-developed in the same region for a long time. And renunciation really means to actually realize that there is a basic goodness that underlies all things, and it does not belong to anyone. And it's the realization of that. It's the realization that this basic goodness, this basic energy, this basic life force does not belong to me. And to be able to actually sit in that renunciation of it, the renunciation of the idea that I can control or I can own basic goodness. And that's just what it is. And that is very powerful, if you think about it. Because I'm going to connect a few different pieces here. When we talk about the new moon in Pisces, Pisces is an energy of universality. It's the energy where the dualities merge and they become one, right? And it's the energy of realizing that everything just exists as a one big life force. And it's indistinct. That is, there are no distinct forms. There are no distinct separated forms of you, of I, of an object one, an object two, and so on. Right? They're all part of the same thing. In fact, they are the same thing. They are one. And I mean, it's a pretty esoteric idea. So, I'll just let that be that way. But the idea of basic goodness really actually helps us to realize that, right? So when we realize that these ideas of basic goodness, these ideas of the fundamental energy of life, it does not belong to me. It does not belong to you. It just is, and it belongs to every being, everyone that exists and everyone that does not exist. And that's why we say it is Shiva. This basic goodness is Shiva, because Shiva is omnipotent and omniscient. And we kind of get into a little sort of war of terminology, because any idea of any description of basic goodness is putting a quality to basic goodness, and there is no quality to basic goodness. And that's another aspect to realize. So when we sit in meditation, when we sit in fasting, when we sit and, of course, like when I'm saying that, I would actually invite you to remember the times when you fasted. When you fasted of food, pretty common thing, but you fasted of anything else. And the effect that created in your body, in your sensations, in your mind. And just for a second, maybe bring that back into awareness and realize what it felt to be then, what it felt to be in that state. There is a sense of gentleness, and that is another aspect of basic goodness that I want to talk about. There's an essence of gentleness that opens up when we realize that basic goodness does not belong to anyone, and it does not belong to me, and I cannot control it. And that gentleness and that softness, when it sits with us, we move with that in the world. And it really opens us up to others so much more than we can expect. So the idea of renunciation, on contrary to actually being an ascetic lifestyle, is a lifestyle of realizing that it's a lifestyle of opening up to others. It's a lifestyle of opening up to everyone, every being, and every object on this earth. And it's that gentleness that is cultivated when we sit in renunciation, when we sit in meditation. And this brings us to the idea of regeneration. So when we sit in that state of being, when we open up, when we become just a little bit more softer to the world. Now, softness does not mean that I cannot advocate for my desires, or I cannot fight for things and so on, and we'll get to that. The softness just really means that we open up more and more to other people, to other beings, to other energies, and so on. And when we sit in that state, our energies, our being regenerates. And I'll pause there for a minute, actually for a few minutes, in fact, and I'll come back to this idea of regeneration. And it's because, the way we understand regeneration, at least culturally, there's all these questions of what is generating, what is it that is regenerating? Now, we have a felt essence of it, we have a felt sense of it. When we get too tired or too sad or too depressed, and we want to bring back the energy, the creative life force, the happiness, we say that we are sitting in regeneration. But I want to actually move away from that idea a little bit. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is because this idea of that something is depleting and then something is regenerating, that captures us in a cycle in a transmigratory cycle of depletion and regeneration, right? And of course, many of us have experienced in life, this sense of moving into some depleted sense and moving out of the depleted sense and getting into regeneration, right? And then feeling energized and feeling in power, and then stepping, into a creative essence, and then coming back, depleting again and coming back into it, right? So this aspect, once we realize this cycle, the cycle that we have all experienced, we can move into this idea of vibrations. And this is really the core of the teachings of Shiva. And so today, to actually explain that, I'll share with you a love story. And this is the love story between Shiva and Shakti. So before I move there, I just want to pause for a minute and see if anybody has any questions or any comments or anything that comes up for you. And I know we'll have more time for longer discussions towards the end. But I just wanted to open up maybe a minute or two of space here. Okay, so we'll continue with the story then. So in this tradition, there are really two non-dual states. So one is Shiva and one is Shakti. And they're really non-dual of each other. So we can't really talk about one without talking about the other. They are contained in infinite fractals of each other. So it's really, really impossible to actually separate them out. But we'll try, and just for our understanding, what we say, when we talk about an essential self, the essential self, which is beyond identification with one thing or the other thing, beyond identification with the names or the bodies or anything else. So that essential self, which experiences everything, that is called Shiva. So it's just the absolute witness of everything. And the essential self, which creates the experience, is Shakti. So right in this definition, I've actually broken down the experience of the universe into a subject and an object. So the subject is the one that is experiencing, and that is Shiva, and the object that is being experienced is Shakti, and then there's something in between that is creating that experience, and just in this essence, we'll also call it Shakti. And so this is where the love story of Shiva and Shakti lie, right? So when we sit in a lot of spiritual sort of talks or spiritual traditions, there's a lot of talks about love, and generally, we talk about the unconditionality of love or the universality of love, and so on. But today, at least in this session, I want to talk about the romantic love. And the love story of Shiva and Shakti is actually very romantic, and it is not necessarily unconditional or universal in that way, in the ways that we hear about other aspects of love. So this is actually a very very romantic story. So what happens is, just in a brief, maybe sentence, when Shiva sees Shakti, Shakti creates. And when Shiva stops seeing Shakti, Shakti stops creating. So again, Shiva is the one that is witnessing, and Shakti is the one that is creating the experience. And they are non-dual with each other, because without the one experiencing the experience, there is no experience. So here's how the story goes. So according to the legend, a long, long time ago, there was Brahma. So Brahma is the creator. So in the Hindu philosophy, we have the three primal deities, as we call them: Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So Brahma is the creator, and Brahma was observing the earth, and earth is the physical, the very the physical essence of earth, right? And felt sad with the current state of the planet. Earth was stagnant, devoid of life, and he thought, we need to bring back life on earth, or it will cease to exist. So Brahma shared this thought with the gods, the other gods. So again, in this mythology, we have millions of gods other than the three main deities. And so he shared that with the gods. I mean, if you're familiar with Greek mythology, for example, you have the pantheon of gods. So in that council, Brahma shared that with the gods, that we need to bring back life on earth, otherwise it cease to exist. And the gods agreed. So after a council, Brahma approached Mahadevi. So Maha again is the great, and Devi is the goddess. So the great goddess. So Brahma approached the great goddess to take birth on earth and become Shiva's partner, right? And now there are actually a bunch of symbolism here, right? So when we talk about the great goddess is the absolute container of darkness. She's the primal container of the darkness, and we'll get to it. But just remember that. So now the thing here is that Shiva is the essential self, who is infinite and unbounded, and Brahma is the creator. So Brahma is the creator aspect, and that's why he's concerned about the state of the world. because he wants to create things. And when things are too devoid, he has the urge to create things. But Shiva is beyond all of that, right? So Brahma goes to Mahadevi and asks, Mahadevi, we beg you to return to planet Earth. It's empty, dry, and nothing grows there. The gods asked. Mahadevi tuned in and felt a deeper despair of the people of Earth. She says, I'll go back to planet Earth, become Shiva's wife, and make it beautiful again, but only on one condition, right? So again, we're coming back to that conditional aspect here, right? So it's not one of those unconditional love stories or the universality of love that we talk about. So she says, if I don't feel seen, honored, or respected, I will leave Earth again. So that was her condition. Her condition was that she will go back to Earth, she will incarnate as a physical form on Earth, but only if she's seen, honored, or respected. Otherwise, she'll leave Earth again. So the great goddess was born into an important priest family. Her father was Daksha. Daksha called his daughter Sati. So the great goddess was born as an incarnation of Sati. So Sati is one of the first forms of Shakti as we concern ourselves in this story, right? From a very young age, Sati had dreams of this blue man with dreadlocks. She did not know who this was, and started drawing pictures of this man. Daksha found one of her drawings and was shocked to see the image. A blue man with a snake around his neck, covered in ashes, meditating, only wearing tiger fur to cover his private parts. He knew who this man was and didn't like him because he was an outcast. The years went by, and Sati became obsessed with this man visiting her dreams. In the middle of the night, she woke up and uttered the sound, Shiva. Shiva. Brahma saw that Daksha wanted to keep Shiva away from Sati, so he came to Earth and convinced him to let her daughter continue developing herself so she could be energetically worthy of Shiva. Meanwhile, in space, Brahma, who's the creator again, and Vishnu, who's one of the primal deities, and Vishnu is the deity of maintenance, so the maintenance of life on Earth, for example. So Brahma and Vishnu were delighted to see Sati doing yogic practices to win Shiva's heart. So again, in this aspect, yoga means the path to union. So basically what Sati was engaging in were practices to realize the essential union of self. So they decided to go to Shiva on Mount Kailash and bring him out of his meditation. So they said, "Oh Shiva, you too should accept a loving eternal companion like Vishnu, who is together with Lakshmi." So now Lakshmi is actually the goddess of love, but she's the goddess of universal love. So what is that one force that maintains life on earth? And that is love, right? And so Lakshmi is the goddess of that love. So he said, like Vishnu, who's together with Lakshmi, and me, as in Brahma, who is together with Saraswati. So Shiva smiled and was quiet for some time. And he says, I'm willing to marry, but I am a renunciate. I can't believe there is a woman who will be a yogini when I practice yoga and a loving housewife when I'm a householder. So again, in the essence of Shiva, there is no discrimination between one way of life and another. It's the absolute essence, right? So now, as we hear that, I invite, how many times have we said this to ourselves? Have we thought about our ideal partners and realized to find an ideal partner who meets us in every aspect of our life, right? How many times have we felt like we had compromised? How many times have we controlled that aspect, that expectation, just to lead into more heartbreaks and more separation in that way, right? And that was Shiva's question. Is there someone who can meet Shiva in various aspects of life? So then the gods told Shiva about Sati. In this recognition, Shiva felt Sati's presence. So as soon as the gods mentioned Sati, Shiva sort of, through his third eye, because Shiva is again omniscient and omnipotent, so he could actually feel the energy of Sati at that time. And as he felt Sati's presence, as she was developing that inner fire through intense yogic practices, Shiva approached Sati, who was deep in meditation. And Shiva says, "Daughter of Daksha, I'm pleased by your devotion." Sati, as she heard that, she blinked her eyes and couldn't believe it was Shiva in front of her. They embraced each other and immediately felt the strong connection between them. It's as if there was no time and space, only pure presence and energy. Again, this is the beautiful aspect of falling in love, right? There is no time and space, only presence. So they married, and life on earth started to flourish. Whole beings arrived in the present, and there was no desire to control that present moment, because in that embrace of the love story, there was just an eternal dance. Shiva witnessed Sati's wild movements and waves of ecstasy. So, you remember the condition that the goddess had, that she wanted to be seen and felt and present and validated as she was, incarnating on earth. So together they were in bliss for aeons, and earth started flourishing again. So here, there's actually a beautiful sort of duality between this Shiva and Shakti, right? So in reality, this seeing of Shiva is in effect a command. Whatever Shakti perceives it to be the pleasure of Shiva to see, Shakti tends to preserve in his subjective experience. Whenever Shakti perceives it to be Shiva's pleasure to cease to see, Shakti tends to renounce and abolish. Whatever Shiva consents to in Shakti, she forces on him and is glad of her mastery to do so, and glad of his surrender. But whenever Shiva insists, Shakti is bound eventually to obey. That happens between Shiva and Shakti. So this is how, when we bring it back to ourselves, Shakti is that creative force that exists between us. And in order to realize the deep, intense romance of this love story, we have to realize that aspect of the creative energy, that aspect of the essential self that just wants to move and that wants to create. How many times do we control it too much? Or do we not appreciate that? How many times do we fail to surrender to that? Can we see those times when we controlled this essence of the energy, the essential self that wants to create? How many times this essential self was wild and just wanted to create, and we got too attached to that process of creation, not realizing that we have the power to actually seize that creation. Because in essence, this essential self, the I, the Shiva, is the witness who's witnessing this entire experience. So this entire process of creation and cessation is the process of contraction and expansion. And this brings us back full circle to the essence of regeneration and depletion as one of the ways that we see it. So in the pure essence, the Shakti is that vibratory energy. It's that vibration of constant contraction and constant expansion that creates and that ceases to create as soon as we realize that we have that power to cease to create. And that goes back again and creates. And there's a beautiful duality in this, again, non-dual essence that exists. In the process of outward creation, there's actually an inward cessation that happens, and vice versa. In the process of outward cessation, what I mean by that is, in the process of a senses ceasing to actually perceive outside influences, there is a natural internalizing, inward looking. And what that really means is that there's an inward creation that starts to happen. And if you have ever gone into any artistic endeavor really earnestly and really honestly, you would realize this process of taking a break from the outside world to realize the inner life that exists, right? So they always happen in tandem. And this is the love story of Shiva and Shakti. And there's much more to the story, but I think we'll save it for the next time. But I will pause here and just open up for open discussions. I know this is a thriller at the point where we left, but this is at the point where we left, at least contradictory to many other stories, is a happy point. It's the point where the earth is still flourishing. So we'll stop there and open up for discussion and questions.
Thank you so much, Peeyush, for that beautiful start for us. One thing that I took from the end of that presentation was that idea that when we take a break from our participation in the outside world, it allows us to refresh our inner life. And so that very much seems what is going on at this period of Mahashivaratri, when one would withdraw from the world, withdraw from eating, from sleeping, and the worldly pursuits for a little while to enrich or come back into contact with that inner life. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, in essence, that is what happens to be. And there's actually another state with that which exists, right? And this is where, I think one of the first things I said about regeneration was that it puts us in a, when we think about the idea of regeneration, and there is a natural kind of question that what are we regenerating, right? What is it that needs generating? And that puts us into this kind of a cycle of regeneration and depletion and so on, right? And of course, taking a break is part of that cycle, right? And when we allow ourselves to do that, we can actually live into that cycle. But there is another essence to it, and this is the essence where these two forces, if I could call that, the forces that deplete something and the forces that regenerate something, can meet in the middle. And this is where actually the dance happens. So, one other aspect of the story of Shiva and Shakti is that when they fell in love, and they experienced this beautiful joy for aeons, where there was no time and there was no space. There was only presence, right? And that only happens when we realize the dance between these two, any two dualities, but specifically these two dualities. And this is where, if I was to say in other words, is the place where our inner fire meets the outer fire or the outer creative essence. And this is a space that is actually beyond fantasies and beyond hopes, so to speak, and beyond, in a way, desires, because it's all about the dance. If anyone, any of you have taken any business coaching or any of those things, one of the things that they say is that, they talk about success and failures, right? And they talk about how we cannot really escape failures, and in order to to realize that, to overcome a fear, to step into that fearlessness, so to speak, so that we can pursue our dreams. We have to realize that there are risks, and for every desire, for every action, there will be an opposition, there will be a reaction. And that reaction, that opposition actually kind of creates a strategy. It creates a map of what we need to do in order to actually succeed. So it's in essence actually talking about that dance itself. It's saying that when we meet in the middle, when this inner fire, when this inner sense of wanting to expand meets with this essence of this empirical being of contraction, then we can actually move into the dance rather than live into fantasies. So that's the other aspect of this idea of regeneration and depletion, that they both happen in the same time, on the same place.
I'd love to hear people's comments in regard to all the many things that Peeyush has shared with us on this really deep subject. Roger.
Hi. Yeah, what was coming to me was the idea of this being the fundamental essence of humanity. They come together to regenerate the earth, and that's where humans start. And that the essence of what created it is love. I would take from that the idea that a fundamental concept in your tradition is that the essence of humans are love. And I have experienced that with other traditions, and I just wanted to get your feedback on that and maybe how that manifests in terms of relations between people.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Roger. I mean, love is such a deep topic. There is so many aspects of understanding that. In this story, I specifically talked about romantic love, and I think you beautifully expressed, that I think the words that you used was that the fundamental essence of humanity to create, to regenerate on Earth is love. And I would want to qualify that a little further, and at least from this perspective, and that is in essence this romantic love, right? But a little bit more esoterically, because I love being in that space. So when we talk about the story, right, we talk about vibrations, and vibrations are actually the fundamental creative essence or the creative force that moves anything. And one of the ways that we experience that in our lives is, in very simple things that we really do, and maybe even simpler feelings that we feel. When we yawn, for example, right? A yawn is essentially a vibration that happens. And, maybe next time you yawn, maybe you can sit with that and recognize, that vibration that happens. And the vibration, really what it does is it brings everything to this very pure fundamental sense of energy. And this fundamental sense of energy is never static, it's always moving. And it's that state of vibration that happens when we yawn. So when we're too tired, what really is happening is that we are just too full. We are too full, and in that fullness, when that yawn happens, all the very empirical aspects in life, they condense to this beautiful, just fundamental state of pure energy and pure vibration, and that's that's the birthplace of all and everything. When other places where we actually experience that, right? When we feel anger, for example, in our bodies, what happens is that the anger starts from a vibration, and once we really sit with that energy of anger without actually experiencing it, that vibration is very palpable. And in many parts of the body, it's very palpable. Jealousy, for example, and again, those are the states of being where our body is really telling us that in this state, we are really full. We're just very full. And, moving on from that a little bit, what happens in that state of fullness, when we realize that state of fullness, we step into sadness. So when we move from jealousy, when we move from anger, when we move from tiredness, we step into some some manifestation of sadness. And in that fullness, what happens is, there's naturally tears that come up into our eyes become moist. And if we let ourselves, and we cry, and that cry is again an essence of releasing that sense of fullness to come to a sense of neutrality, maybe. The other aspect of stepping into that creative power is to actually move through that process, because really, when we let ourselves move into that state of fullness and that sense of surrender and sense of gentleness, then we can step into fearlessness. And the process of creation it has to be fearless.
And would you say that fearlessness is love?
Yes, absolutely. It requires a lot of courage to love.
Bob, what were you going to say or ask?
I guess the takeaway for me is when you talked about renunciation, it struck me that one of the things that we can renounce is our dualistic sense of ego. And that the more we can renounce that, the more we can sort of gently accept that energy that's out there. Is that something you were saying? It's what I was taking away.
That's just exactly another way of looking at it. So ego is attachment to something beyond maybe its use, beyond its lifetime. Typically ego is attachment to identities. What happens with any attachment is, even before that, why do we attach to things? We attach to things because we believe that there is some essence of basic goodness that lies in this that we need to control and that we need to have in order for us to be alive and live. When we do that, we live a very egoic life in a way, the process of meditation and process of many spiritual practices is about renouncing that attachment to identities. Is that process of renouncing that attachment to controlling those basic goodness. It's to realize that this basic goodness cannot be controlled. It flows, and it flows freely with everyone. And once we realize that, then we are not separate.
Was touched with the idea of renunciation at this point, especially with all that's going on in the world, and really resting in, I can't control or change things in the world bigger picture. And that there's what you talked about was resting in basic goodness. And for me, it's resting in meditation allows me to surrender to what is. And then I feel like I'm guided, or I'm told what I can do in my life to give more love and peace and joy and faith in my life. And that with all that's going on in the world, if I try to control and say, this is awful, and it is awful, but if I feel like I have to control or fix it by myself, it feels very overwhelming. And so when I rest in faith and trust, then I rest in that basic goodness. I can give love and live this only moment with love and peace, because I want more of that in the world than fear and anger. Doesn't mean I don't have fear and anger, but I'm not using that in my ego sense of trying to control things, and allowing the feelings to come and go, and then resting again in that still oneness that we all are one, and that there is a basic goodness, and having faith in that. And it doesn't, with what's going on in the world, it feels kind of overwhelming to really have to live love in that way. And it feels like it's really important that each of us live love with peace and joy in our every moment, and still pray and work with everything that we can do to be of service to the goodness that is really the basis of life. And I'm wondering how you feel about that.
That's very beautifully said, Diana. I mean, just the way, when we realize that, right? I mean, it brings back the power to us, and that's really beautiful in a way, right? One of the things in this tradition is that everything's perfect, and it's a deep realization to understand that that perfection is actually not a passive, static state of being. It's very active, very dynamic, and always evolving, but it is still perfect. Every moment, every way of being, every life that exists, everything that exists is just perfect. And that's why it takes fearlessness or courage to love, because to love something that we don't agree with, you know, yeah, that takes courage. That takes a lot of courage. And when we sit in that essence, you know, as you described, the essence of peace and the essence of joy, and we really sit in that basic goodness, you know, that, yeah, that is, you know, that brings us to that state of perfection, because then we're not, you know, and that's the difference between fantasy and the dance. You know, the fantasy is that I want something to change, and unless that something changes, you know, then the world is bad and the world is evil and messy and all of that stuff. And when it changes, I'll reach heaven. You know, that's yeah, that's a fantasy, you know. And when we step into the dance, we are stepping into the dance with tenderness, because we are opening up to all the messiness that exists in the world, and we are choosing, you know, that's another very powerful word. We are choosing to participate in that dance. We're consenting to participate in that dance. And you know, what are we bringing is all up to us. And when we realize it is up to us, that is empowering. That is the real power.
I'm so glad that you clarified a little more what you meant, Peeyush, about this idea of fantasy, when in which we think that something has to change for us to experience heaven, for us to experience the divine, for us to experience what is good, whereas this radical acceptance of all that seems imperfect, that's very messy, that is real life. When we actually step into that way of living, that is what you're calling stepping into the dance.
If I may,
Please.
I was reminded of Dr. King's quote about the long arc of history as his way of speaking to mankind at that level, that you have to take the long view, that all of this messiness is what's necessary for the basic goodness to arrive here into our consciousness. And then I happened to look down and I saw the quote by Einstein for March 2nd. A new type of thinking is essential if mankind is to survive and move toward higher levels. And I think this is perhaps what is dawning in our consciousness, is that this is all this messiness is the necessary, perhaps fertile soil in which these new seeds can sprout.
Yeah, indeed, right. And how can it not be? You know, that's the other thing. I mean, how can it not be? If that didn't exist, I mean, if the messiness didn't exist, you know, then what would we create? What is that new seed that we create? You know, would we consider it new? You know, and we can just like look back in our lives and realize that, right? I mean, every time, you know, we step into something new is because something was messy.
I was just thinking when you said that of people in Ukraine right now that are in the subway and they're being bombed, and the gratitude that I am in a place that's safe and that I can have these discussions and talk about the messiness is part of the healing. And I can know that. And yet if I'm in the bomb shelter and people are throwing bombs at me and my house is ruined, it's really, how do we support that? And I think that, you know, it'd be really hard to hold on to that in the middle of life and death for them. And and just having a lot of compassion and those that are suffering so deeply, and having a lot of compassion and love, and just continue to send that love and light, because that's all we can really do. And then we have to in some way have faith, like you said, David, that there is some, that we need the messiness, but if you're in the middle of the mess and it is so devastating, it's difficult to keep that view. And I just want to honor that for the people that are in many messes in their daily life, or in Ukraine, or even just in our own lives, that there's so many people suffering. And how we can't fix the suffering of the world, and realizing that we're not in control, and that it's really important to just keep that sense of peace that we can hold on to in our little life.
Yes. And just before I call on Carolyn, just to add on to that, Diana, just that same exact compassion, only perhaps even magnified, that we want to extend towards those who are actually inflicting this violence upon the others, and imagining what is happening within themselves, within their consciences, within their souls, and knowing that they have people back home who are radically opposed to what they are doing, and they probably have a certain amount of internal conflict in their own hearts, even as they do it. So how much compassion we need to extend toward them.
That's really important. Thank you. Yeah.
Carolyn.
The last two comments are kind of where I was about to say. I've always thought of Shiva as such a universal force that it would be very hard to say anything or know anything really about that that capacity, and that to bring about such destruction and regeneration. But now that we're kind of faced with this colossal situation, what's showing up is universality. Yeah, I've had the TV on quite a bit in the last few days, and it's just amazing. And I think it's actually disturbing Mr. Putin a bit, that people all over the world, and even in Moscow, I mean, thousands of people are showing up to protest this horrible wrong. And so there's a universality as a force for good. And what we can do, it's not that control isn't so much the word, but what we can do is what Diana's last comment said. We can focus on the Ukrainian people in these situations that we're seeing, and we can just, I don't want to say pray, but we can just be so focused on their suffering, wishing for the best, learn from their amazing strength that they're showing, and participate in that way in the promotion of universal brotherhood, which of course Theosophy certainly emphasizes, as do religions from all over the world. So I think we can be very active in a way that and not more than of course we don't have control, but we can have influence. And so I think that's something to really strengthen and focus on, and see if the tide can be turned away from or to this force for evil.
Thank you so much. Mary?
Just thankful that I have exposure to different opinions, different things that I'm not aware of. Of course, everybody really is thinking of the Ukraine, but I liked your comment about thinking of the perpetrators, because like we've heard, the people in Russia are hearing that it's the Ukrainians that are being the aggressors. So it's a good way to help us to realize that, we don't know everything. The news that we get is not always true, that there are many, many, many sides to every story. So thank you very much for this opportunity to get another viewpoint and get a little enlightenment. Mahalo.
Hello, Mary.
I might add just one more comment. Trying to recall who made the original comment, but the complexity of the situation, and as Mary reflected that we don't know all the details. We don't know. We form opinions. But this same complexity in terms of the world's events and what is right and what is wrong, this is something that goes on within each of us at every moment. We are constantly in conflict. We do things that we're not certain are correct or right, and it's a conflict. We just have to, as many of you have pointed out, we have to rely upon the basic notion of goodness, that it will eventually show itself, if not in this moment. It is the truth.
That was so beautiful, David. I absolutely love that. It's very humbling to realize that our ancestors were both the oppressors as well as the oppressed, and those energies, as they come to us, they play out as being oppressed and oppressing within us. And what really happens out in the world is just a projection of that. And I think this is a very Jungian concept, right? The projection of complexes. Every time when we sit in these world events and we notice the energy rising within us towards any side on any intensity, that's actually speaking to us in ways, saying that this is what we experience. And when I say we, as in our ancestors, a culture, a place where we come from, this is what we experienced, and how are you going to respond to that? And that's what the energy is asking. The energy is really asking me, how am I going to respond to that? And it's not because it's happening to someone external or some other culture, because it's really happened to us many, many times before. And it's continuing to happen to us within us. And that's the idea of basic goodness. So basic goodness is not just peace and love. It's also peace. It's also courage. It's also action. It's also all the other things that you would not consider that. But for how it manifests in every person, that's different. And that's the journey. That's the response that we have. That's the thing that we bring to the dance. And that's the aspect that we generate within us.
Oh, thank you so much, Peeyush. I'd like to make an opportunity for anyone who might like to give a vote of thanks to our speaker, Peeyush Kumar.
I can offer a vote of thanks. Thank you so much. That was very powerful. A lot of learning for me too. I did not know all that history, but what I really heard was your heart and how it we can apply it to our daily life, and the regeneration, as well as the breaking apart and coming together in both forces. And I really thank you. It's an important subject right now with what's going on in the world, and I really appreciate how you shared it, and the caring and love that you showed while you did it. So thank you very much.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Joanna. I really appreciate that.
So I think that all of us have been fortified in a way to go forward with just a little bit more courage, a little more detachment, a little more love as we go forward into this week.